some point, the math is the math.
I think we can do a better job using that information.
It reinforces my belief that I have the best constituents.
Hello, Clawbackers. It's your council member, Jimmy Flannigan, back live on Facebook on the Clawback Live, episode 6. We are really making our way through the clawbacks now. It seems like we're getting into a pretty good rhythm here. I've been to a bunch of meetings this week, and a lot of folks apparently are watching. So if you said hello to me this week after watching the clawback, hello right back at you. As we grow this show, I really want to hear back from you all on what types of topics you think we should cover. We'll still do the meeting previews and the latest dramas and all the things, but there may be other topics you want me to talk about, cover topics in the city, other things. This should be interactive, and hopefully at some point we'll be able to really track the comments live and engage directly with the audience. And if you're watching this on delay, if you're watching it when it's not on Friday, please still submit your comments and share with your friends on your Facebook page. You can also find it on YouTube, Instagram TV, and podcast on SoundCloud. Let's jump right into our top 3. Hey, I did it right this time. Last week I screwed up my titles. Meeting preview. So the council meeting next week is going to be a short one. It's on Halloween, which has the opposite effect of Halloween. It's not a scary meeting. This one will end early, mostly out of deference to the city staffers and the public with children who want to go trick-or-treating. So it should be a pretty quick agenda. We will have the zoning case in District 6, the River Place Milky Way zoning case. But I don't expect there to be a big difference between what we did on second reading and what we did on third reading, which I covered in a previous episode of the Clawback, really building a new set of zoning regulations surrounding areas experiencing high risk of wildfires. So I'm hopeful to see that come to fruition next week. Our latest update on homelessness. I feel like as a community, we've turned a corner, at least in how we talk about this issue. I have been to, as is my job, I go to many community meetings, many community events. Sometimes I'm the invited speaker. Sometimes I just happen to walk in the door. I think as I tallied up on my calendar this week, I think I gave 10 speeches on homelessness just in the last 7 days. Just to give you an idea of what some of those are, I spoke at a class at the University of Texas. I spoke to folks at Canyon Vista Middle School. There was an APD meeting about some crime concerns, which frankly, it's one of the safest neighborhoods in the city, but it was a great conversation. I spoke to an alumni group for a fraternity, not just UT members of that fraternity, but all of the Austinites who are in that fraternity elsewhere. It was a pretty interesting crowd. The City Works training that the city does. We held our regional meeting on homelessness with other elected officials. I spoke to the Board of Realtors. They were in District 6 earlier this week. We had more of our dining room table conversations. I spoke at a meeting at Peace Lutheran Church. And of course, I did alumni band last weekend and got to speak to some of my old UT friends and get their input on what they're hearing and seeing from afar. And honestly, what's happening, I think now, is that we're getting away from the craziest and most hair on fire parts of this conversation and really get down to the reality of homelessness. What is it that causes people to fall into that condition? What is the process they follow? And how do we build a system that can actually get folks back into self-sufficiency? We don't have that kind of system very well in Austin right now. Most cities in America don't have that kind of system, but a few do. And those are the types of ideas we're looking at to model and get this problem in a place where we are really helping folks. The one story I did want to relay from the Canyon Vista Middle School event, one of the folks in the room talked about they're having a family member experiencing homelessness. And they talked about how that family member went to California and because, he's going to get a phone and they're going to treat him nice. And that's why he went to California. The thinking being, that's what we're doing here in Austin. It's going to cause this great migration. But the challenge wasn't so much about that story as it was, well, what should we do? Should we put your family member in prison? And they replied, well, no, he hasn't committed a crime. That's kind of the point. The folks who are experiencing homelessness, by and large, are not in the criminal justice system. And the ones that are need a special kind of help that involves the criminal justice system. But the ones that aren't, we don't want to get to that stage. It is faster and cheaper and better to help these folks before they enter the criminal justice system. And I really hope as we reach the governor's deadline of November 1st that he is taking these considerations to heart. We don't really know what's going to happen. We've made changes to the ordinance. We are standing up our system. We're getting changes done at the Arch. I just hope the governor treats these people, especially the ones without criminal histories, with the dignity and respect that we reserve for all of our neighbors. We'll see. We'll have a clawback on November 1st. I don't know if I'll know much Friday afternoon, depending on what happens, but I'm sure there'll be a big community conversation about it. And the third thing in the election, we've talked about this every single week. We are in early voting right now. I should have worn my early voted sticker. Get to the polls, people. Get to the polls. If you live in Williamson County in the District 6 area, you can vote at the limited district office, the El Solito pool. If you live in Travis County in the Northwest Austin area, you can vote at the Randall's Breaker or the Randall's in Steiner Ranch. You can even vote at the YMCA by McNeil High School. And again, we want you to vote no on A and B. B especially, it really has a dramatic impact on our tourism industry. There are so many parts of that industry that rely on the success of the convention center. Even in District 6, it's not just about downtown hotels. There is a whole community of folks that work in tourism, that work in the restaurants, that work the actual conventions. And a lot of those folks live in District 6. It's really no surprise we have one of the highest percentages of tourism workers in our part of town because we have a train that goes to the convention center. So it's really not a surprise that this is an important issue for District 6, and we want to make sure that our tourism industry is strong and vibrant. It helps us raise tax revenues based on out-of-town activity. And as I often have said before, the best part about tourism industry is that when people come and spend their money, they then leave. That's what we want to see have happen. So please vote no on Propositions A and B. If you're a Williamson County resident, you have county Propositions A and B. Those are fine. But all the other ones at the local level, you can vote no. And also a shout out to our music industry. They've been great partners. They understand the value of the convention center. So many local musicians get hired to work those events. Visit Austin's been a great partner to local music. They are also in agreement. Oh, and one other thing, the Chronicle and the Statesman have also both endorsed against Prop A and Prop B. So it seems very clear what we all need to do, but we got to get out to vote in order for that to happen. So no on A and B. Let's move on and get my titles out of the way. And we'll go to our next segment. Oh, no. Hold on. Oh, I thought I had it worked out. I'm going to get my titles done correctly. There's a little like, okay, we're going to do it one more time. I'm going to make myself go away, and we're going to do the titles one more time. So that was supposed to happen smoother. I will at some point work this out better. And on those titles, I really, I think it obviously wanted to use Miley Cyrus's Wrecking Ball song. Unfortunately, she's not returned my phone calls, so I don't have the license or the rights to it. So I did the best I could with the licensed music I have access to. I hope you heard the title at the end in Miley's voice. The code is not a wrecking ball. That's at least how I pictured it in my head. Nonetheless, I want to walk you through a few more parts of the Land Development Code. We started this conversation last week. I think if I magically press a button, it will pop up and we can walk through this together. Here's the page, austintexas.gov/LDC. That's where you can find all of the resources. If you scroll down on that page, you can see all the chapters and the map. And last week, we showed you how to find the map. It is really important as you hear information about the Land Development Code that you're going to the map and ensuring that the stories that you're hearing really apply to the thing that you're thinking about in your mind. As I've had conversations with folks across the city about this, it often strikes me that we'll be talking about a high-level concept, but in reality, we're talking about somebody's specific property or some specific property that's nearby where they live. It's always important to make sure we're working with the actual facts and the actual reality. What I want to talk about today as we go through the chapters, you can see here, we talked about chapters 1 and 2. They're pretty straightforward. Chapter 3 is the meat of the thing. It's 500 pages, almost half the entire Land Development Code. So we're not going to do the whole thing in one meeting, but I want to talk about the most common zones in the entire city. The most common zones are the R zones. R stands for residential. It is almost, based on my look at the map, it's a majority of almost every district, certainly a majority of District 6. When you go into the code, this is chapter 3. I'm going to page into some of the text so you can kind of see the table of contents and flip through that. Some examples. You get to the growth concept map. This map that's right here, you can see in the, I think they're red. I'm colorblind, so sometimes I don't always know. The areas that years ago were identified as areas of growth. In District 6, they're pretty straightforward. The area surrounding Lakeline Mall and the future build out of Robinson Ranch. No surprises there. But this has been part of our guiding document for how we rewrite our land development code, because the original code, written in the 80s, did not use a growth concept map. In fact, most of District 6 didn't exist when the last zoning map and the last zoning code was written. So that's why this is a really good opportunity. You get through some of this other stuff. I'm going to talk about conditional and minor use permits in a minute, but I'm going to jump right to the zones. The first set of zones, the only zones we're going to talk about today, like I said, are the R zones. So you have some old ones like RR and LA, rural residential, Lake Austin. They're specialty zones. If you live in one of those zones, it'd be good to think about that, but generally you don't see those applied across the whole city. You have this section here where you see individual uses defined. We'll show you the table in a second where it's just the titles. There are longer explanations. You scroll down into the zones. Here on this chart, you can see the list of uses and whether or not they're allowed in each zone. So across LA, RR, R1, R2, ABC, R3, R4. When you see P, it means it's permitted. It means that's the thing the zone can do. And you can do that as long as you meet all the other requirements of the zone. You don't need council or special approval. CUP and MUP. You see mostly CUP in this document. You can see a little bit of MUP when it comes to recreation. Conditional use permit, minor use permit. What it means is, in order for a landowner or a property owner to do this thing in that zone, you have to get it approved. You have to get it approved either by a commission, like the Planning Commission or the Zoning and Platting Commission. Those are made up of people appointed by the City Council. That's the CUP. Or you have to get it approved by staff with special consideration. That's the MUP, minor use permit. In that process, and this is so important, in the CUP and MUP process, additional restrictions can be applied. It is very easy to look at the map, see a zone, start to get nervous about what could be in that zone, and you go to the chart and you're like, oh gosh, I don't know that that should be that thing because it's going to be really big and it's going to tower over my neighbor's property or whatever. But in reality, the practical implementation of these things is going to go through a lot of review. So best to stay focused on the areas that are not marked as P for permitted, because those are the ones that we're saying, yeah, in this zone, you should be able to do it based off of the requirements that are laid out. I'm going to show you a few of those requirements. I know we're 13 minutes in. I'm going to try to go a little quickly through it. If I scroll back, there's RR, there's LA, there's R1, R2A, R2A, R2A. Now, what you're seeing on your screen is 2 pages. So this chart is the R1 chart, even though it says R2A, because this is like a PDF that should have been printed out. Here's the chart. This one half of this one page is the definition of R2A. That's it. The old code and even the old drafts, multiple pages to define these things. This is one of the core areas of simplicity that we are accomplishing in this land development code. And you can see in R2A, which really is the most common zone in District 6, you can have a single family attached. But if you look at that, what it really says is you can do 2 units. You can either do it as a duplex, or you could subdivide your lot. Instead of having a duplex where there's one owner, you could have a duplex with separate owners. It's a pretty good alternative because that halves the land in terms of the value, and that makes it cheaper, more affordable moving forward. You can see the setbacks, you can see the height restrictions. All the property in R2A is basically as tall as it is right now, 35 feet overall, 35 feet overall. As you go into the zones, you can see R2B, basically the same in terms of uses, a little bit less on the setbacks. Same height though. Some of the frontage stuff. You get an R2C. R2C is a zone really targeted to existing development that has a really small lot. So you can see those lot sizes are a little smaller. Setbacks are similar still, 35 feet. Get into R3 and R4. This is real important. R3 and R4. Those are what people refer to as the transition zones. There's essentially none of that in District 6. The transition zones were intended to be places where there was a combination of factors: high opportunity areas, access to schools and jobs. I mean, District 6 has that in spades, but transit and walkability and other things where District 6 was pretty built for automobile uses. And so you don't see a lot of those areas. We don't have a lot of transit. The transit we have is really about commuters. So you don't see a lot of R3 and R4 in the suburban areas of the city. There's one little pocket out at Millwood, but I think that was a mapping error. We're going to get to that in a second. When you dig into this, you can see things get a little more complicated in terms of what you can build. But at the end of the day, all the data is here. All the information is here. When you hear stuff in the public, you see post on Nextdoor, you see post on Facebook. Make sure you look to see if it's a promoted post. You might be watching this as I promote a post on Facebook. But always go back to the map and go back to the text to make sure that what you're being told actually applies to what you're doing. And if it does, contact my office or contact your council member, and we can work out the specific details and really pragmatically what the code is going to do. But what ultimately I wanted to cover today is this document is accessible. You can actually get in here and read it. It's pretty straightforward. Things get a little more complicated in some of the non-zoning chapters, like how does transportation work and how does utilities work? They don't really have that much of an impact on what we think of as traditional neighborhood development. Those are really the bigger ones that we would want anyway on major corridors or on the highways, where we basically already have them. So as you go through your thought process and you think about your property or other properties that you're concerned about, always go back to the draft and see what it says. And if you think there's a problem or if you think there's an issue, contact my office and let me know, and we'll go and work that out. The process, I'm going to remind you all every week, the process is this will come to the City Council for first reading in December. That does not mean final adoption. It means first reading. What I imagine we will do at first reading is we will list out for staff, here are the things every council member saw that might be wrong or should be changed. Staff will then take that over December and January, come back in February with kind of the second addendum or an update, and then we'll do final adoption in 2020 and hopefully February, March. So I've already seen misinformation about, Jimmy wants to do the thing on all three readings in December. No, that's not happening. I mean, I'm literally seeing straight up lies happening on social media. So always check in, you can read the document, and you really can figure out what's going on. And that's kind of the point: simplicity, straightforwardness, and then solving our housing affordability and our housing supply issues. I'm going to make that go away. The show is over. So that's great. We're at 18 minutes, longest show ever. I'm going to cut over to the final scene. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure you go out and vote. Vote early. It's one more week of early voting. You can even vote on Saturday, but just this one Saturday. So if you're watching this after tomorrow, you want to get out to the polls, vote no on city props A and B. And we'll see y'all on the Clawback next week.